Thanks for downloading the Marcus Pye podcast.
Welcome to the Marcus Pye podcast, and it's a very special one today because it's the first podcast that we've recorded out on location. We've gone to somewhere that's very, very dear to my heart. It's Thruxton Circuit in Hampshire, my home circuit from when I was a kid, and somewhere that I've enjoyed racing at over the years, reporting, commentating, and many other activities along the way as well, including driving, I think, a 2CV with a steering rack in back to front on an old sort of driving experience day. So much going on here at Thruxton. It's a vibrant motorsport centre. We're here with Pat Blakeney, who runs the place, and his right-hand man, Lorne Mitchenor. For those early days at Thruxton, a mixture of club racing and the big internationals. And the big internationals kicked off with the wonderful Formula 2 race meeting. Easter Monday Formula 2 became a tradition here at Thruxton, with Jochen Rindt winning the first 3 years. And Jochen, the Austrian, obviously was the first posthumous Formula 1 world champion in 1970, but he'd won those 3 races. And I mean, it really set the scene, set the pace for Thruxton, Pat, as a racing circuit. Big days and grand ambitions.
Absolutely. Obviously, the work that went into setting up the circuit, I've seen some of the footage of the film when they built the circuit effectively. And it's just an incredible place that the actual tarmac bit hasn't changed for its 52 years. And I think that's what's great about it. It hasn't been sterilised as everywhere else has been.
That's right. The great temptation over the years, as the racing classes have got faster, the technology has moved on, the cars themselves have been honed to the ultimate degree, is to try to build the circuits around them, slow them down if at all possible. Yes, you can't just have endless speed at race circuits, but one of the joys of coming to Thruxton has always been this ability to compete on the same circuit that your heroes did when you came to watch a Formula 2 race or a Formula 5000 race or a British F1 or something like that back in the day. I mean, it's a very, very quick place. It's a daunting circuit, 2.356 miles around, with the celebrated church corner that everyone kind of remembers. And I'm sure that, Pat's raced historic Formula 1 cars here in March A11, and there's a great picture in the office here showing him doing just that. And the physical effort to drive around here quickly in a seriously fast car is something else, isn't it?
It is. It's everybody remembers Church as, if you like, the corner at Thruxton. I think Church is actually one of the easier corners here. All right, it's very, very fast, but I actually think Goodwood is technically a far more difficult corner to get right here, and probably a more or just as important corner.
I think very much it's important. I mean, you've been through the Campbell-Cobb Seagrave complex, as it were, to feed you onto the very fast outer area of the circuit, out in the country, as if we tend to call it as commentators. But you've got the quick left, the quick right, and all of those elements, those nuances of the circuit, are the ones that have to be taken absolutely bang on correctly to build the speed down through Church. Church is one of those psychological corners, isn't it? As you say, it's not that difficult if you're on the right line. If you turn in a bit early, though, you're going to wear the scenery fairly quickly.
Yeah, it is. It's a classic turn in on the left, apex on the right, exit once again on the left, and it's pretty much dictated where you do all of those 3 points. But as you say, if you turn in early, you try and make a pass down the inside of somebody there, etc., and that puts you on the wrong line, then yes, the scenery does come towards you quite quickly.
Why wasn't it renamed Bothams after the cricketer Ian Botham managed to roll two Saabs in one day?
Two Saabs in one day. I think that does go back a few years. I think early 80s.
I love Formula Ford here, and of course we were here in the days of Ayrton Senna. where he was absolutely unbelievable in a Formula Ford. And you only have to ask Dick Bennett, who ran him in his Formula 3 days, etc., as to how good he was. But I remember he came here in a Formula Ford and did several laps within a couple of hundredths of each other on the trot, which is absolutely unheard of. Yeah. And he was one of those extraordinarily naturally gifted drivers who, when they sat on the grid, they were in a world of their own, absolutely 100% focused. And all his rivals were thinking, oh, that Senna is really good, I don't think we can beat him. And they'd psych themselves out before they started. But his amazing ability, from my perspective, certainly as a journalist and commentator and whatever else, was that he went flat out from the moment the flag dropped. He didn't spend too much time kind of deliberating on whether the tyres were hot or cold or whatever. They were what they were. And while the rest of them were sort of mucking around thinking, oh, I've got to bring these tyres in, etc., he'd gone. And he was often a few seconds up the road after a couple of laps. And so much work's done in those early stages of a race that he'd waltzed away with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what sets the greats apart from the others. Their ability to extract the nth degree out of the car in those first couple of laps. As you say, the tyres probably aren't at the right temperature, the brakes aren't, but they just find that limit very, very quickly or instantly, whereas the others tend to, I'd probably have to put myself into the same category, you need a couple of laps just to feel your way around, and by that time the greats have disappeared off into the distance.
Yeah, and that's it. The multiple world champions, the Schumachers and the Hamiltons and the Sennas and the Prosts and whatever else, they could go out there, and as in any professional sport, it's about limiting your mistakes. I mean, everyone's capable of making n number of mistakes in any sport or any pastime, whatever. But if you can get to that point where your errors, such as they are imperceptible from the outside, then you're pretty much there. And it's doing those laps, lap after lap after lap, and not making the mistakes that separate the greats from the kind of superheroes. And the superheroes really are in a class of their own. We saw Senna here in Formula Ford, we saw him in Formula Ford 2000, we saw him in Formula 3, and absolutely dominant in many of those situations. And he used to come here afterwards as well. He was a really, really pleasant guy. He used to turn up after in the year after to watch Maurizio Gugelmin, his housemate, doing his racing, and Maurizio was following in his footsteps, if you like. And he'd always come down and support if he could, which was absolutely brilliant. Formula Ford is still remains special here. I
think it's special wherever you are, Marcus.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is particularly. I think it's just a formula that has just worked over the years. I know there's been a couple of dips in it, but you look how strong Formula Ford is now. And the old adage, if you can drive a Formula Ford well, you can drive anything, and it's still true to this day.
It's absolutely right, and but it's interesting, isn't it? That's the old Formula Ford Kent engine cars that have come back to the fore.
Absolutely.
The Zetec era came and went.
Yeah, Duratec came and went.
Exactly.
Back to the good old Kent engine.
Back to basics.
Yeah, absolutely. But the cars just work. They've got the right grip for the amount of power they've got, but there's no aerodynamics on them, so every bit of work you do is on mechanical grip and balance. And I just think as a development car for young drivers, or for any driver, it's just the perfect car to start in, or to finish in. Look at Rick Morris.
Absolutely, classic Formula Ford champion this year, Rick, and I raced against Rick back in the day. Absolutely unbelievable. Naturally, I didn't race against him. He was racing out the front. I was driving around somewhere in the middle to the back. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not over. It's not over egg the pudding
doing
here.
That now.
But I'm involved these days, or have been involved with the Historic Sports Car Club and with Historic Formula Ford, and I was absolutely delighted when Ben Mitchell, who was driving my car, the Jimmy's Iced Coffee Merlin Mark 20, won the two races here in 2018, so last season. Very, very special for me. But the more special, perhaps even than that, was that way back in the day. I'd not been to Thruxton until the very back end of 1973, the BARC Championship Finals meeting. But that particular Merlin won the heat and the final in July 1972 here with Rob Cooper driving it. And Rob was a special driver. He was quick. He was a British kart team member, and he absolutely starred that day. And so it was a kind of completion of a circle, if you like, to have that car winning again. And just for me, as someone who'd been to dozens of race meetings over the years, and was always passionate about coming to Thruxton, it was so special. We were at the Daytona Motor Speedway over the weekend for the HSR Classic 24, an absolute festival of all that is best in endurance racing across the classes, across the eras that take us back to the start of those Floridian Enduros. One of the star turns there was Derrick Bell, who with son Justin won his category in the multi-race format, driving the Lowenbrow Porsche 962. And Derrick was very, very keen to chat to us about his memories of racing here at Thruxton.
Well, of course, you've got to realise that Thruxton was new, because I started my career at Goodwood for 3 years, my home track, and then suddenly Goodwood closes, and we had Thruxton, which was a mammoth place. And believe it or not, I actually went there for my test drive with John Wyer to drive the GT4, the Gulf GT40 in 1968. And people were just asking me to drive lots of lovely cars. I was actually at Ferrari at the time, and driving Formula 2 and Formula 1 in my first season, big time. And John Wyer said, come and test. So I went testing at Thruxton and did quite a good job in a brand new car. And of course, I texted Mr. Ferrari, or should I say telexed Ferrari, and said, can I be released from my contract to drive for Ford? Well, that wasn't a very clever thing. If you're going to see the film that's just coming out, you'll understand why. And I didn't know there was any animosity between Ferrari and Ford. And so I got this telex back. He said, honour your contract, Ferrari. I got the message, so I never drove that car that day. But of course, that car then went on to win with Pedro Rodriguez in it. And it could have been my first win. But that was what Thruxton did in some ways. But as a track, it was a lovely track, very fast. I thought a very nice flowing track with some tight corners. There's big high-speed sweeps out the back. And I drove a lot of Formula 2 cars there, and it was just wonderful. And I remember vividly one day, I'd been on the front row next to Jackie Stewart, second to Jackie on qualifying and that sort of thing. But I remember one particular day, the next year I was there, and I was driving the March, the Frank Williams March, I think I'm right in saying. And we were racing, Ronnie Peterson was leading, Graham Hill was second, and I was third. And as you came up to the chicane, as we came up there, I'm going, oh my gosh, I could get by these guys. But unbeknown to me, my mother, who'd never been to a race in her life, with me anyway, and my stepfather were up in the grandstands right there at the chicane. And I came and I thought, I'm going to have a practice. I'm just going to see how late I can brake into the corner, because it sort of go left and then right and left. So I came flying up to it, and I pulled out, went way away from. I dropped back from Graham, so I wasn't going to run into it. But if I went by, I was going to have to take both of them. And I knew I could do it. It's the most amazing feeling sometimes. So I pulled out on my own. I dropped back, came flying up, hit the brakes, and of course, because I was on a different bit of track, I spun. I went backwards in the ditch behind, and I don't remember it, of course, but my mother went, oh, my poor darling, and my father went, bloody idiot, and that was it. So I had some great memories, and I remember I did win one race. I think it might have been Formula 5000 in a Chevron 5000, and then another one with a BMW 2-litre in the county championship. We had some lovely races there, and generally the weather was always great.
Those days were fantastic, and they can be relived at events like the Motorsport celebration here. It's probably the Formula 2 races that really got me totally hooked on the fact that you could actually see current Grand Prix drivers, Formula 1 drivers, competing out in those was special. And I mean, I came here I remember coming here vividly. I managed to miss the first 6 seasons of Thruxton, which was, absolutely irresponsible of my parents, I think, because on occasions we'd drive down to the West Country and we'd drive down the A303. In those days, the noise banks weren't there. And you could actually see something going on at the circuit. And I didn't really want to go to Salisbury shopping or something like that. Salisbury shopping's great, the cathedral's wonderful, etc. But I wanted to be at Thruxton. And even on a miserable wet day, it was always good fun. And having been introduced to the delights of Thruxton, I then made it my absolute business to come here as often as I could. And on one occasion, remember my father said that he couldn't take me for whatever reason. So I said, okay, fine. I was living in Basingstoke at the time. And I thought to myself, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go on a train to Andover. Get off the train at Andover. And I think the advertising slogans at the time said Thruxton was 5 miles west of Andover on the A303. Well, I wasn't a Boy Scout or anything like that, so I didn't have a compass in my tough shoes or whatever it was. And it wasn't a sunny day, so I couldn't see where the sun was to gauge where west was. And I set out trudging along from Andover Station. Even these days, I probably couldn't find Andover Station without looking at the signs. But I walked from Andover Station out to the 303, down the 303, which is quite a long way, past what's now the Hawke Conservancy and bits and pieces like that, through Way Hill, etc. Got to the circuit, and the moment I'd paid my £3 or whatever it was on the gate back then, because we're talking about the mid-1970s, the heavens opened. It was absolutely torrential rain. It was hideous. But I thoroughly enjoyed my day, spoke to a bunch of the clubby drivers who were here. There was a monoposto race here and other bits and pieces happening. And I remember the sun finally did make its presence felt towards the end of the afternoon, sort of heading round to the west. Been really useful to have had it in the east in the morning as well, so I could actually gauge which way to go. But Brian Cutting won the last race today. It was a forward truss special saloon race in his Escort with the V8 Martin Formula One engine in it. But in those days, club racing was, I think, more clearly defined than it is now. You came to a typical BARC clubbing and you get about 6 races out of it. You'd probably get, there'd be a special saloon race, there'd be a mod sports race, which was always good fun, some great variety in that. There might be a clubman's or a sports cars race too, or maybe a mixed grid. There'd be production saloons, there'd be Formula Ford, and possibly something else, maybe a heat, or maybe 2 different special saloon races for the over and under 1 litre cars. But you didn't come racing at Thruxton until a bit later, Pat.
No, I didn't. Ironically, Thruxton was very instrumental in me starting my single-seater and my eventually what became a career in motorsport, not always behind the wheel, I hasten to add.
It's a big money spending your driving career.
Yes, yeah. So I came here, a mutual friend, actually, and it's amazing how sort of history comes back, had the ex-Ian Taylor March Formula 3 car, a chap called Mike Adams, who was...
the late Mike Adams, yeah.
Yeah, late Mike Adams, who was Ian Taylor's right-hand man, effectively, at Thruxton for a number of years. And I was working abroad trying to earn some money because I just wanted to go motor racing. I was on leave, I came to Thruxton and just helped him for the day. And ironically, sitting next to us, and we mentioned his name earlier before we started this broadcast, a chap called Tony Broster was next to us in the paddock. And I just got chatting to Tony, and in between his cigarettes, he would say, give me his words of wisdom and everything. And he said, so why don't you go racing? I said, but I'm working as hard as I can out in the Far East at the moment, Middle East at the moment, trying to earn some money to go racing. But it's not, I can't really do anything like this. I don't know what I'm going to do. But he said, no, get yourself a single-seater, chap. You've got to get a single-seater. He said, and I happen to know where there's one for sale that might be eligible for a championship next year. And bear in mind, he was chairman of the championship of the club that was running the championship. So I took Mike Adams with me to go and look at the car up in, I think it was Rugby area, and just went, wow, blimey, I can afford that. and I bought it. And that was the only racing car I looked at, and it was an Royale RP27, which I really wish I still had.
Thruxton Motorsport Centre, home to premium driving experiences, where 4 laps in a supercar or single-seater racing car means nearly 10 miles at speeds of over 100 miles an hour around Britain's fastest motor racing circuit. It's an experience that few others can offer. You can even have a 140 mile an hour passenger ride in a BMW M4. Thruxton Motorsport Centre, home to premium driving experiences.
Visit thruxtonracing.co.uk to book your premium driving experience.
I look forward to seeing you here.
Well, yeah, it's great to be sitting here with Pat Blakeney, who runs Thruxton, and Lorne Mitchenor as well, who's so involved in the evolution of the venue. You're very limited, having worked with Bill Coombs all these years to bring it up to where it is. You guys, you're still hamstrung, if you like, by this sort of 12 race days a year, aren't you, Pat?
Yeah, absolutely. We are and we're not. I think it's just having those 12 days, whilst financially, obviously, it makes life very difficult to make the circuit work. It does give the circuit that air of exclusivity where people still go, oh, I can't race there every weekend, and we're going to be very limited on when we can race there. So it's still a privilege to come and race at Thruxton.
I agree, and I think that conversely, you've got a situation where if you're a race fan, you live in the south of England, and you might want to come to Thruxton to see an event, whatever, you make it a destination, you'll come and do it. And it's not like if you miss next weekend's, there'll be another one along in a couple of weeks' time, like there is at so many other circuits, at the Brands Hatches and the Silverstones and the Sneddertons and the Doningtons, etc. So in that respect, you've got, half a dozen race meetings over a season.
The fact that we only do have these 6 race meetings, when you come to Thruxton, you're going to get quality racing. We haven't got the capacity to use it to, as a filler sort of event. So, and the other thing it's done to us all is we've had to diversify. You can't, as Pat said, you can't run a venue like this on 12 days a year. So we've just opened it up to 101 other things. That's been really good for us.
That's brilliant, because I think that a lot of the nucleus to this has been this wonderful Thruxton Centre that's been open now a year and a bit, hasn't it? Something like that. And that really has given you so many other opportunities to host different aspects of the motor industry, let alone motorsport, and that's important, isn't it, Lorne?
Yeah, what the building has done for us in a massive way. We've not stopped being a circuit, but we've become more of an estate. We've managed to use the rest of the facilities here, not just the roughly 2.5 miles of tarmac, but we've got great swathes of paddock area, we've got grassed areas, we've got a whole host of other buildings that we've been able to pull together with the fact that we've got the Thruxton Centre, and it's helped massively financially because we've just been allowed to diversify and attract huge elements of new business for us.
And over that year, it's obviously working for you, and more people are seeing Thruxton as an option for in fact, as a destination for their car launches or their car club track days, etc. Or of course the many days you have here of circuit driving with the school.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just that. We're still evolving with the business, really. So we're learning how to operate the building. We're learning and trying to find different income streams. And yeah, if you look around you today, we've got some driver training going on in the paddock area. We've got the skid pan in use today. We've got a function operating this evening. So there's drinks and a meal for supporters of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Air Ambulance in the Thruxton Centre this evening. We've got Christmas parties booked in. So it's just diversified massively.
And you've got the Hampshire and Isle of Wight air ambulance kind of base is here, isn't it?
Yes, we have. Yeah, so they've been here for a number of years, and in the last couple of years, their base has expanded. The number of hours that they now fly has expanded. I think there's something like 20 hours a day now they're on call. And it's a huge operation down there. But covers a huge area as well.
It's absolutely staggering, the work they do. And I mean, I've sat on many occasions, not only in the commentary box at the chicane here, but also down at the complex at sort of Campbell Corner. And it struck me how often that air ambulance operates during a race weekend. It's often in and out, and I imagine it's just for calls, not for, it might be for training purposes.
No, I think it's definitely every time it goes up, it's going up for a very good reason.
Yeah, it is. Every operation they do is live, and I think, what do they say, it's £18,000 or so a day just to keep the thing ticking over.
Which is staggering, and no VAT breaks on these things.
And no government funding whatsoever. So,
it's disgraceful, isn't it?
Yeah. Everybody relies on that air ambulance now, not just the Hampshire one, but throughout the country. HeliMed is another one of the emergency services, effectively.
Very much so. And I know one or two people who are incredibly grateful for it. I mean, one of the historic Grand Prix Car Association races, Brian Jolliffe, had an awful incident on somewhere down near Southampton. And he was waiting for a cardiac bypass operation, and he had an arrest, crashed the car, and he was tended on the spot pretty much by a cardiac nurse from Southampton, happened to be driving past, which was pretty impressive, and within minutes was loaded into the air ambulance, taken to Southampton, operated on, saved, and that was in kind of February of one year. But in September, he won the 500cc Formula 3 race at Zandvoort in his Cooper Jab, which was absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, there was an incident here, probably 4 or 5 years ago now, where somebody had just landed their aeroplane here and was walking past the air ambulance base to go back to pick their car up, and had a massive heart attack right outside the air ambulance base. And you couldn't have picked a better place to have it, to such an extent that had he been anywhere else, he wouldn't have survived it.
Exactly. Looking ahead at Thruxton, I mean, it's looking really verdant and lovely today, and what is actually a really, really pleasant kind of autumn afternoon. You've got a good programme next year. You had this season you had 2 British Touring Car Championship races, which I think put an immense strain on the small team here. But you came out on top, and that really was an amazing season, wasn't it?
We've had a great season this season. We've been very busy. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we're just getting to know how to use the new building and trying to extract the most from it. So just silly things. We had our cocktail bar on the balcony this year for the 2 touring car rounds, and it was so well received. It was just a lovely atmosphere, and it's something hopefully we'll repeat for the future. But it's just learning different things. 2 touring cars. Yes, it does put a strain on you. The touring cars, the workload for that is, a lot of it is obviously comes as part of the package. So a lot of the organisation, the parking up in the paddock.
And next year you have British Touring Car Championship actually opening the race season, May 16, 17.
Yeah, so it always comes as a bit of a shock to the system, and it's a sort of a big wake up. You haven't got a little warm-up event beforehand to make sure everything's up and operating.
Because in the old days there was often a clubby first before the Easter Monday Formula 2 race.
Yeah, just to make sure all the facilities have survived the winter. You haven't got any leaks from taps and toilets. And
mice haven't chewed through the telephone wires or whatever. Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant. And I mean, next year, perhaps not quite so intense in that you've got the British Touring Cars in May, you've got British Superbikes in August, you've got the Thruxton Historic Race meeting in early June 6th and 7th, which is always going to be a cracker here.
It is, yeah, and we just love that meeting. So it's evolved from our 50th anniversary back in 2018. It was a meeting that Bill Coombs and myself were really passionate about, and it was one that we wanted to do for ourselves, purely for sort of our own personal reasons, and we wanted cars on that meeting that we were passionate about and that we had an affinity with, and we managed to do that for the anniversary meeting. It seemed we'd done so much work for that, it was silly not to continue it. So we have the celebration this year. And for 2020, that's going to morph into the Thruxton Historic, which I think will be its final title and hopefully go
more of a catch-all that takes it forward.
Yeah, it does. And I think it says more about the event than celebration. So.
Can you hook car clubs in and at this distance? Because we're still kind of a few months away from that. It would be great
absolutely.
to think.
Yeah, definitely. The car club thing. I mean, you alluded to it in you earlier. That the massive thing about Thruxton is it's got so much heritage and it hasn't changed. The layout of the circuit hasn't changed. So we can encourage and get people here that raced here, from 1968 onwards, and nothing's changed. And they go, oh, the circuit layout, it's still the same, and it's a massive draw.
The facilities have improved.
I beg to differ, yes.
We're not having a wee in a ditch now, I have to say. But
Well, I mean, I was absolutely gobsmacked. When we were putting the 50th together, I had the opportunity to go through a lot of our archives, because we've got a massive archive here of information. And to see that there was single rail Armco on the inside of a chicane, it was just like, that's
nice little launch pad.
Well, but you guys, and they told me, I mean, that was, I
never had any trouble with track limits then. No,
exactly. But you guys told me it was actually fairly normal for circuits to have that sort of setup.
Yeah, very much so.
And Armco was a bit of novelty. It was normally straw bales.
Exactly. What's also brilliant now, you've got the spectator banks, the raised spectator banks, kind of 2/3 of the way around the circuit, which makes for absolutely brilliant viewing, and also a lot of capacity as well in terms of you can get a lot of footfall on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the plan is in the future we can open up a little bit more of it. I don't think we're ever going to be able to have viewing round by church.
No.
But we have got from Seagrave through to Noble, which I think is on my wish list to get that opened up. But there are various reasons. I think trying to make the balance sheet work is one of them, because you can't just open it up. It's got to be fenced properly. You've got to have the facilities in there. Unfortunately, because of planning, we're not allowed any public address system in that area of the circuit. So it would all have to be tuning into the 87.7.
People don't have to hear me. Well, that's a benefit for some.
There's always a silver lining, Marcus.
I do find that one of the most difficult questions I ever get asked from our guests, and they all say the same thing: where's the best viewing? And it's really, I just find it really difficult to answer, because everyone you talk to has got a different idea of where
subjective, isn't it?
Oh,
massively.
Absolutely.
Massively.
Yeah, exactly. Later on next year, you've got the truck race meeting. Is that a kind of a popular one here?
Yeah, it is. It's probably, if you look at the three biggest meetings, we've got superbikes, touring cars, and that will vary depending on the weather, which is the biggest. If the weather's good, superbikes will be huge. If the weather's bad, they'll stay at home and watch it on Eurosport. British touring cars, hardy lot. They tend to come and watch the touring cars come rain or shine. But obviously the numbers do drop if it's bad weather. But the truck meeting would be our third biggest meeting of the year. Very popular. And a real spectacle around here. Seeing 5.5 tons at 100 miles an hour side by side around here is pretty special.
I get scared watching truck racing on the M25, but it's at least in its natural habitat here, which is good. One of my favourites is the classic. The CSCC race meeting.
Yeah, Classic Sports Car Club. Came here a few years ago as a one-off, and they keep coming back, and we love having them here. The cars that they bring along, the racing is excellent. There's some novel ideas with them, so sort of time penalties for race winners and things like that. That just makes the meeting an absolute pleasure, and lovely people to deal with as well. But on both sides, competitors and organisation.
And what's great, that goes from historic cars from the cars of the 1950s and 60s,
Yeah,
right
right
through
up
to something that was
yeah,
made last week,
new
if you like.
millennium. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
I think
And
that's the beauty of that meeting. It's just
it's
the
so
variety of
diverse.
vehicles. If you can't find a vehicle you like at that meeting, you've never seen a car in your life.
You're
You know,
dead
it's
right.
just phenomenal.
So yes, that's a great event. So BSB in August, and in at the end of August. It's a very compact season,
It
isn't
is,
it? Sort of
yes,
May
yeah,
till
very
August.
much so.
BRFCC race meeting.
Yeah, so back again, they came to us in 2018.
Yep.
It was predominantly a Caterham festival, and
Yep.
the Caterhams around here, whether you love or hate Caterhams, the racing was just astonishing. They were 4 abreast, 5 abreast coming up Woodham Hill. The last place you wanted to be on the last lap coming out of church was anywhere near the lead, because you're going to end up back in the 8s and 9s by the time you've got to the top of Woodham Hill. So they're back again predominantly Caterhams, and I don't know what else is on the programme as yet, but it will be a good one, that one.
I'm sure it will. I mean, I think back to some of the finest racing I've ever seen has been at Thruxton over the years, and having been here for sort of 40 odd of its seasons, I think if someone asked me to put my finger on it, which was the best race I ever saw, it was a race here for Mini Melias, and that was back in the 70s. And there were 2 teams of kind of local drivers who were really going for it. There was the Wessex Kentreds team from Salisbury, the Curnow brothers, Mike and Alan Curnow, in their cars, and then Steve Harris and Ian Briggs in the Steve Harris Minis. He was an ex-Downton man from the village over near Salisbury, where Daniel Richmond wove his magic tuning BMC A-Series engine. He was kind of, I suppose, the latter-day Nick Swift, if you like. And those 4 guys, I don't think they came round in the same order twice over the course of 10 laps. In those days, it wasn't a 20-minute race. It was always going to be 10 laps or 12 laps or something like that. And that was absolutely magical to watch. Mini racing is still brilliant here.
Go back to touring cars at the beginning of the year. So one of the support races for BTCC this year, back in May, was the Mini 7s and the Miglias, and it was without a doubt the star of the show.
Yeah, for sure.
Everybody was raving about the Mini racing. It was just brilliant.
And there's been some good drivers have come out of great drivers come out of those Minis, and
absolutely.
even a few years ago, Peter Baldwin, who was racing back in the end of the 60s here, was winning the championship.
Yeah. And ironically, at the May meeting, I was driving up through the paddock, and I was going to the outside of the circuit, and there was this old boy walking up, and there it was, Mr. Baldwin. So I gave him a lift over, which he was very appreciative of.
No, it's great, isn't it?
Yeah. So,
but it just looking out of the window just takes me back and brings back so many happy memories. I've been fortunate here to have competed in Formula Ford 2000, in classic Formula 3 cars, sports racing cars. I mean, Chevron B26 chocolate drop, the Vosteiner toy BMW, and did other things as well, including the most extraordinary situation where I raced in the Boss Formula. In Damon Hill's old Formula 3000 Lola with a 3.5 litre DFZ Formula 1 engine in it, and having done 2 laps of practice in the wet on slicks at Silverstone the day before we came here, and I remember sitting on the grid being absolutely petrified of what was going to happen. I think I was 6th out of about 15 on the grid, and I said to the chap,
the Nigel Greensall Benetton era.
Probably not quite,
bit
but
before that.
It was amazing, because I said to the chap who'd run in the car, Graham Johnson, I said, what do I do off the start line? I've done a lot of hill climbs and sprints and know how to start. And he said, give it sort of, I think it was like 6.5 or something like that, and just sidestep the clutch. I said, only one problem. Underneath this carbon fibre cowling, it's not backlit, and it's a grey day. I can't see the rev counter. So I tell you what you need to do: leap over the pit wall, come out to the grid when I'm there, and then I'll raise the revs until you give me the thumbs up. That'll be 6.5, and I'll remember the noise. So hardly ideal, and it's not the sort of thing that one of the superstars on television is going to be doing, but it seemed to work quite well. I came around the grid, and I used to always be massively scared going out onto the grid here. I used to sit in the car in the assembly area. I used to cough. I used to splutter. It was absolutely awful. My sort of lungs were rattling. But once I was dumped the clutch the first time and got round to the grid, I was all right. So I sat there, gave it what I assumed to be somewhere near 6,500 revs, and the thing took off like a rocket. And I arrived at the first corner, Allard in second place, and finished third in the race, having pulled 190 miles an hour up the hill or something stupid, which was brilliant. I was physically and mentally destroyed for the next 3 days, but apart from that, it was fine. But I think other great days, driving Ginettas, the actual Ginetta Championship, was really good fun here, and doing some other bits and pieces, which great. And also working with our late great friend Ian Taylor on the BMW driving days, and then with Gray Headley on the Mercedes days. Yeah. Those days, I mean, we just had a whale of a time, didn't we? It was great fun with a team of probably 50 instructors.
Yeah, fantastic camaraderie, all with a common passion.
Yes.
And ultimately, everybody was a racing driver or an aspiring racing driver. And I can remember sharing, one of my roommates on the BMW days was Dario Franchitti.
Blimey.
And you just think...
It's a brush for greatness.
Yeah, absolutely. And sadly in those days we did used to have to share rooms on occasion. But yeah, and who else was there? Darren Turner.
Yeah.
I can remember working on events with David Leslie.
Yeah. And all the Mike Wildeses and the Influxes of this world.
Yeah,
real characters
who were your heroes in the sport.
Yeah.
Obviously, relative newcomer to it then. And you're just with these gods of the sport, really.
Just amazing. And that's sort of, I think in a nutshell, what we all probably love about motor racing. It's not just seeing Lewis Hamilton winning the latest Grand Prix or his latest World Championship. That's great if that's what trips your trigger. I've always been much more into the grassroots sport, and the days we had, the 70s and 80s, in the days before kind of motorsport polarised into a few one-make classes, plus the BTCC and its supports, etc. We had so many different types of car, and as Lorne was saying, all those amazing cars that all looked different, they sounded different. You knew one particular Formula 3 car from the next one because it just looked so individualistic, and that was great. Today, it's all a bit more kind of antiseptic. The cars all kind of... There's so many one-make series, aren't there?
As a young driver now, you can go all the way to Formula 1. If your career path is single-seaters,
yep,
you go all the way to Formula 1 driving the same car that everybody else you're racing against is driving.
Yes.
There is no difference, which again brings us back to Formula Ford 2000, the early days of Formula 3, or until recent years, Formula 3, where it was a multi-chassis championships, where you have to, as a driver, you have to develop the car. Your feedback was so important to the team with the development of that car, because the team maybe got the car that year, it's a new car for them, they didn't know all about it, so you've got to work together with the team. Whereas now you get into an F4, an F3, a Formula 2 car, the teams have been with those cars so much longer than you have. They probably know, well, they do know more about it. You've got data on there which they can tell you to the nth degree what you're doing right, where you're braking, etc. Whereas go back to the Formula 4 era, it all came from the driver. So your feedback to the team was so important.
That's right. In those days, of course, there were so many more designers involved because there were...
Absolutely. Everybody had great ideas. And probably if you put every one of those great ideas together on one car, it would have been a world beater. But I'm not sure that it probably happened once in a decade.
It's like the optimum laps on your data. It's never going to happen, but that's what you might be able to do if you were really good.
So if you look at Formula Ford 2000, you get the 84 Reynard or something like that, which was the peach of all of the cars.
It was a wonderful car.
But then the 85 wasn't.
The 85, yes, that was really ghastly. I remember driving it here on a test day. And I'd driven the 84, the Maurizio Sandro Sala British Championship winning car with Robert Singh and Magic Motorsport at Silverstone on the Grand Prix circuit, and worked my way up to taking Club Flat, which was absolutely brilliant. And we came here to drive the Formula Ford and the Formula Ford 2000 the following year, and it had a kind of a razor edge bodywork that in front of the cockpit, which just didn't look right from day one. And round the back, when the kind of the wind, the air pressure on the car changed from the right-hand side of the body coming into church to the left-hand side of the body work coming out of church. Your head sort of went, ooh, and sort of wibbled from side to side and kind of shook your eyeballs. It was really quite frightening. We've been reflecting over the last 40 minutes or so on Thruxton as a centre of motorsport, as a centre of excellence for tuition and driving experiences, of which there are many here. Pat, you can perhaps run through some of the things you can do here.
Yeah, so the Motorsport Centre basically has evolved, or the name Motorsport Centre, because we don't want it just to be a racetrack. So we've got a multifaceted venue. We've got obviously the 2.4 miles of tarmac around the circuit, but we've got a skid pan, a very, very good wet grip area, which again we use enormously for driver training, plus our own voucher sales for the general public, corporate days, that sort of thing as well. We've got a great outdoor kart track, so 3 different configurations there. We've got 900 metres for adults, 365 metre junior or club track, but we can also extend the 900 into an 1100 metre circuit as well, and that's now going into its 20th year next year.
Really? Yeah, I remember when it was first put 2010.
in 2010.
Quite staggering.
So that's working very well. The off-road facility we've got as well. So, and then sort of you come on to the newer bits which we can offer, which we've never really been able to capitalise on in the past, things like the corporate hospitality side of things.
And one thing that strikes me is that you don't have to have a road driving licence to come along here and enjoy the facilities. As a young driver training offer as well, isn't
Yeah,
there?
absolutely. So you can drive under 17s effectively can drive a car here as well, but Lorne also looks after some junior skid pan courses as well, which I think is, apart from being great fun, is invaluable for any kid growing up and wanting to go.
Would have saved me my first couple of accidents, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Oh, massively, and the feedback you get from it, especially with kids, because they're just like sponges, they put their parents to shame. And we have a lot of fun over there where you have a 15-year-old kid go out in the car and mum and dad are full of, this is what you need to do, son, this is what you need to do. And then normally we've got a couple of minutes at the end and you get the mum or dad in the car and the kid's done better than the mum and dad. It's absolutely phenomenal.
And you can have some of the young drivers on the racetrack as well, can't you?
We do, or we were doing junior Porsche experiences, but we don't tend to mix the juniors with the seniors.
No, obviously.
So, it's not something that we're developing that. Unfortunately, again, sadly, going back to the financials, balancing the accounts at the end of the day is not a cost-effective use of the circuit, because we are limited on the number of days we can operate on circuit. So using up a day for half a dozen people to drive a Porsche there isn't cost-effective.
But if you could corral 30, 40 people together to do something like that, it would be worthwhile. So once or twice a year you might look at that.
Quite possibly,
Yeah.
But it's not something that we're looking to expand on at the moment.
What do you run on the supercar fleet here these
So
days?
supercar fleet, we've got 9 Porsche Caymans. So they're and everything on the fleet now are our cars, and then we've got a mixed fleet of Formula Renaults and Formula Ford 2000s. So sort of 81, 82 Van Diemen's, plus the the Martini Formula Renaults. So mixed fleet, very similar in performance, and they're very, very popular. But on the supercar side, we've got Ferrari 458 Spider, we've got Aston Martin 430 Vantage, we've got a trio of Jaguars now, so ranging from the 2-litre F-Type right the way through to the V8 SVR and the V6 in the middle as well. Audi R8, McLaren, we've got and a Ford Mustang, which has been very, very popular.
Was that called the Bullet Experience or something?
No, it's a modern Mustang, so rather than the classic Mustang. But I'm not the world's greatest lover of American cars, and when we got it on the fleet, I thought, I'm going to drive it, but I'm not going to like it. And I actually do really like it. It's a very, very capable car.
And it's a true V8.
It is. Yeah, it's got a proper V8.
Yes, to sound.
So it's quite thuggish and mean.
Massively.
Yes, yeah.
That's what we like.
So surprisingly, I thought, so I didn't want to really like it, or didn't think I was going to like it, and I do. It's a stunning car.
So it's kind of fantasy island type, isn't it? You can cast aside your everyday A to B mobile. And come and just enjoy something different. And it's always better if you come along with a loved one or family or friends or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah, and we can do high speed rides in passenger seat. You can come along and you can have the Tiff Needell experience, where Tiff takes you around for 3 laps doing what he does best, which is showing off, really.
Absolutely, and
does a very good job of it, I have to say. His car control is just phenomenal.
It is, and I think that's one of the things that a circuit like this really does engender. If you're going to go quickly around here, and Tiff's done thousands of laps from when he was racing Formula Ford back in the early days. And bear in mind that Tiff was a fully fledged Grand Prix driver.
Absolutely,
and it's not often you get that opportunity at a racetrack.
You see, I think he crossed a milestone off. I think it was either early this year or last year. A cold, damp day, and he's got his BMW M4, and he managed to pitch it into Goodwood Corner sideways, and he managed to keep that sideways slide all the way to the exit of church.
That's impressive.
So all the way down through village, he still had some angle of oversteer through there.
He never really took...
phenomenal.
He never took up rallying, did he?
No.
Because you always thought, I remember the days when some of the rally drivers came and did the racing, and the racers tried rallying as well. And Derrick Bell, who we're going to hear from within this show, he did the RAC rally, I recall. But it always struck me that the rally drivers could do brilliantly on the circuits. It wasn't quite so transferable, the skill set the other way, and I have
the greatest admiration for the rally drivers. Their skill level is beyond.
It's just you don't want to wear blinkers, isn't it?
No, absolutely. I think going back to the old 80s and 90s and doing all the manufacturer days, one talent that stood out from there that actually did well at rallying was Carl Jones.
But he's Welsh though.
Yeah, he was Welsh, so he was brought up in the valleys and going sideways. But a real talent there.
But you've got previous in your family, because your aunt was a bit of a star as a works Ford driver.
She was, and my family are horse orientated, and but Auntie Gillian. So
Gillian Fortescue Thomas, ladies and gentlemen, who I saw as teammate to Jerry Marshall in a works Ford Escort back in 72, I think it must have been 72, 73.
Yeah. That was probably when I developed my love for motorsport. Was my friend Tim and myself used to cycle over to Gillian's house when she was living in Kent, and used to go off racing with the Mexicos and everything. Rallycross at Lytton, and that was what gave me my
bit of a
passion
protege of Stuart Turner of Ford through
very much so.
Through Autocross Rallycross,
and obviously a lot of engine development work and everything for Ford there when she was in the Escort.
Just amazes me that it took you so long to actually get round to getting into the sport yourself.
Yeah, it was one of those. It was a sport that I really didn't know that much about. I wasn't that knowledgeable, apart from Gillian, and she took quite a big break from motorsport. Apart from Gillian, there was nobody in the family or close friends that had any links to motorsport. So I didn't even know the best route in, what to do or anything, and it was just it was a passion that I had. I built my own grass race car when I was doing my apprenticeship, raced that reasonably successfully, and then just wanted to go racing but didn't know how to do it. It's a lot easier now. I'd say our friend Google would have helped me enormously back then.
Having said that though, Pat, Google would not have interfered with you finding women and alcohol, would it? So I think they'll...
No, probably wouldn't. No. So, but I had a good journey coming into motorsport, and a very rounded, very diverse sort of journey into motorsport. But it's something now that I can't see me doing anything else.
No, but it kind of also equipped you very well to nurture your lad Scott with his racing. I mean, at least he had that benefit that you didn't.
Oh, we did, yeah, absolutely. So we'd spend a Sunday, we'd come here and we'd make a go-kart and we'd do this, we'd do that. And so, yeah, so I was encouraging him at probably 4 years old to do donuts on the grass and bits and pieces like that. So, no, he's grown up around it, but sadly doesn't drive as much as he really ought to, or as much as his talent dictates he ought to.
Yeah, exactly. I saw him in that Formula Ford 2000 Delta of yours, and he looked as though he was born to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And whatever he jumps in, he seems to go reasonably well in. And unlike his father, he doesn't seem to make the same many mistakes. Yeah,
exactly.
Definitely less crashes than his father.
But at least you raced a Formula One car.
I have, yes, yeah,
or more than one, in fact.
Yeah, more than one, and I feel very, very privileged to have done so.
I think the first time you drive a car with a Cosworth DFV Formula One engine in it, it's just mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yeah, you go back to you talking about the Boss race and how to get off the line. So my first race in a Formula One car was at Zolder, and my teammate was Mike Wilds. So obviously Mike's a renowned driver. He's raced in Formula One and he's an absolute superstar. So in my naivety, I said to Mike, "So Mike, what do I do at the start? Because I just haven't got a clue what to do." So he said, "Follow
me, son."
Yeah, well, basically he said, "Whatever you do, don't sit with the clutch or with it in gear and the clutch down at the start. You've got to wait till the red lights come on before you put it in gear." He said, "Otherwise, you're just going to overheat the clutch and you'll be
your history."
Yeah, your history. So, well, that's going to be a challenge because I've always driven up to the line in first gear to make sure that it is first gear I'm in. So the worry of trying to get a dogleg first gear on a 5-speed Formula One car into gear where you need both hands to basically get
it's kind of
into
across the
Formula
left
One,
and back. Yeah.
And I've got to do it when the red lights come on was going to be a bit of a challenge. So we've got so anyway, I can sort that bit out. He said, "And just remember to take your time on the first couple of laps. Everything's going to be cold. You need to get some heat in those tyres, so just build yourself up gently." And the red lights went out and he just disappeared off into the distance, and I've never forgiven him for it. But the long and short of it was we ended up finishing 1-2 in that. Him 1, me 2. So it was a cracking race for my foray into Formula
I remember
1.
a similar thing when we were doing historic Formula 5000, and I was very fortunate to end up with a half share in a Lola 332 with Simon Hadfield, a great old friend of mine. And the first time I drove it was on a test day at Brands Hatch on the Grand Prix circuit, and it was damp out the back on the loop, but it was dry on the Indy circuit part of it. And I was able to tag on to the back of Tony Trimmer in Frank Lyons's T330 332 and get a kind of a free masterclass in how to do it. And it was absolutely stunning. I just nailed myself to his gearbox and stayed there for 3 or 4 laps. Then I got a rear puncture, and that was the end of it. So, but great fun.
I have the greatest admiration that you could have stayed there for 3 or 4 laps, actually, Marcus. Yeah.
I think my car was better.
Okay.
But no, it's brilliant, and of course those 5000 cars, 5-litre stock block Chevrolets in the main, were fantastic to watch round here at Thruxton in their heyday, and there were days when the lap record was shared between Formula 5000s and Formula 2s back then. 2-litre Formula 2s with about 300 horsepower, something like that. They were amazing. But the 5-litre Formula 5000 cars, I mean, back in 74, 75, the lap record stood to Vern Schuppen in a Lola T332, to Brian Henson in a March 752 Formula 2 car, Jack Lafitte in a Martini Formula 2, Ian Ashley in a 5000 Lola, all on 1 minute 11. And two very, very diverse kind of genre of car, but the same basic thing. And 120 mile an hour laps around here that was finally achieved by Brian Henson in 77 really is quite something, and was a wonderful spectacle at the time.
Yeah, doesn't it put it into perspective though? The last time Formula 3s were here, they were in the 69s, I think it was.
Yeah, absolutely staggering, and they have nothing like the power. It's
No,
it's amazing.
yeah, they actually the Formula 3s last time British Formula 3 was here, on the test day they were actually running without a rear wing plane.
Really,
Main plane, yeah.
just to see if it would
just
be
the side plates.
Yeah.
Of the rear wing, and they were still absolutely flat round the back. Even in the rain, they were flat round the back.
really.
So yeah, incredible.
It's difficult to get your head around that even as an enthusiast who's been going along and seeing as many races as we have and competed and the rest of it. It is extraordinary, but of course it's symptomatic of the way the sport's moved on with the evolution of the cars, the data feedback that is available to the young drivers. And isn't it great this year that you talk about young drivers? Our old mate Gray Headley's lad James has won that Ginetta Junior Championship. I mean, that's a really stonking effort.
Oh, it is, especially when you consider how little experience he had actually racing prior to that. So most of the kids coming into that have done international karting, British Championships.
At huge cost.
At huge cost, probably double that of Ginetta Juniors.
Yeah.
But I have the greatest admiration for James. So in his first full year, he's come in and he's really dominated the championship.
And he's been quick in Formula 4 as well, hasn't he?
Yeah, phenomenal in the F4 car.
It's just about finding the money.
It is, yeah, unfortunately. But to a certain extent, that's always been the case. People have always struggled to find money to go motor racing.
Yeah.
I think it is probably more difficult now.
I'm sure it is. Back in the 50s, etc., and 60s, when there were the trade supporters came in and they would trade sponsors give you this much for a win or this much for a start or whatever. BP was one of the very big ones, wasn't it? And BP ended up, years later sponsoring Formula 3, historic Formula 3, the Formula 2 Tolmans that Brian Henson and Derek Warwick finished first and second here in 1980. They were BP cars.
Going back to sort of our old friend Bill Coombs, obviously he started here back in 78, 79 with the Unipart Scholarship, which was the funded season the following year.
And Scrap Iron Racing, as it was called,
Yeah,
Scorpion.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But it's those days of mentoring, of often wealthy individuals, the Rob Walkers of this world, mentoring a quick young driver. It's just become more and more difficult because the actual the cost, and particularly the cost differential of moving up year on year on year, just because you can afford one thing, the jump to 3 times the budget for the following year precludes the vast majority from getting there, which is, I think, why many people should actually just turn around and say, I love my racing, I'm never going to get to the top, but let's discover the joys of club racing and historic racing and do it for fun, for the hell of it.
And it's not all about the racing, it's about the social, it's the people you meet, and it's just enjoying life.
That's exactly right.
I think it's a little bit sad when you see some of the 14-year-old kids that are sort of so focused on getting to Formula 1 or whatever, and they don't have a life outside of motorsport.
Yeah, it's just, with the events that we have and the smaller meetings, that's one of the things that really jumps out at you from the paddock here, and it's just the camaraderie, the friendships, and borrowing spanners, borrowing a bit of this and a bit of that, and Pat will tell you more than anyone, you've been in those paddocks, and it's a phenomenal atmosphere.
But they're people that you're racing against. It's not just that they're at the same meeting. People want you to be out there because they want to compete against you. And I think the club racing is just miles apart from the professional end, and it's the bit of the sport that I'm most passionate about.
One of the funniest things, I haven't been in this industry for long, and we had the North Gloucester road race meeting here, and they put it out on the tannoy because someone wanted a sprocket to fit a Triumph, and it was just and I just thought, no one's going to give up a sprocket, and they did. And there were 2 or 3 offers of a sprocket for this guy so he can carry on, and that's what it's all about. You can be competing, but it doesn't stop friendship.
I remember the days when those sort of calls were quite commonplace over the tannoy, as it was back then, and someone had broken the diff on their Cortina or whatever, and there'd be a call goes out, and someone says, "Oh, well, you can take the one out of my road car that's sitting over there on the bank at Allard if you want, as long as you return it at the end of the day," which they did. But
shades of the will hire 24-hour at Snetterton. Yeah. You don't, especially in the old Sierra Cosworth days, you don't drive your road Sierra Cosworth there because it'll be stripped bare by the end of the 24 hours to keep people's race cars going.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, great days of motorsport, and it's been a pleasure here at Thruxton today to talk to Pat Blakeney, to Lorne Mitchenor, and reflect on the history of the place, the current day, and of course the future, which kicks off with the BTCC on May 16th and 17th. I know that historicracingnews.com is passionate about Thruxton, as we all are, and has a big presence here at Thruxton. So let's say cheerio for now, and let's look forward to the next Marcus Pye podcast on historicracingnews.com.